It feels surreal to be reading this, knowing that I will end up watching it with all of you. I've often thought about my chapel and this moment, yet none of my imaginings came even slightly close to our reality. Nonetheless, I am so grateful for this community, however we come together. My paternal grandmother, Jean Elizabeth Collard, was born on January 11th, 1934, in Fresno, California. She was the only child of my great-grandparents, Grover and Irma Gates. My great-grandfather's family settled in rural Northern California in the late 1800s, and the land that they lived on has now been home to our family for over 5 generations. I knew my grandmother through the stories my dad told my brothers and me about her. I knew her through her smell of cigarettes and old flowers. I knew her through our shared love of the place that we both called home. For me, knowing my home is another layer of knowing me. I want to share it with the people that I love. It's a piece of me, a way to understand me differently. For my grandmother, it was her sanctuary. She wanted to prune her roses and chop wood to maintain her routine of simple pleasures. On a cold Tuesday morning in early March of this year, only weeks after we arrived back on campus from our February break, I found out that my grandmother, whose health had been declining for several years, was being put on hospice. As I went about my day, rushing between classes, my grandmother remained constantly on my mind. I found myself wondering specifically about the parts of her that I knew very little of, and now may never have the chance to learn. What was my dad like as a little kid? Did he argue with his sisters like my brothers argue with me? What did she struggle with as a single parent? What was her childhood like? So many people talk about my great-grandfather, but she never did. Why didn't she? Did she ever feel lonely? Had she always loved roses? As I thought about all of my questions, I decided to write her a letter. But like so many other plans this year, COVID-19 intervened. And as the pandemic threatened to disrupt our school year, the letter slowly slipped to the back of my mind. A few days later, the decision to close campus and continue school remotely rocked our community. Those last 3 days on campus proved difficult for everyone in different ways, whether managing international travel concerns, or concerns of family dynamics, or simply the uncertainty surrounding our goodbyes. Looking back, all I can remember seems to be a haze of emotion, both filled with laughter and lots of tears. On the morning of March 21st, as I planned to leave campus, I called my mom to confirm her pickup time. First, she commiserated with me for the difficulty of the situation, and then she gently told me that my grandmother had passed away the night before in her sleep. I came out of the bubble of that phone call and into the arms of my classmates, who, despite their own sadness, supported me exactly as I needed. Though those days remain a teary blur in my mind, what sticks with me is the love I felt in that moment, and the realization that this place, the community, and the individuals have also become a piece of me, a home. On the 10-hour drive back to my house that afternoon, I thought back to my letter and the questions I would now not be able to ask. I decided to write it anyway, not anymore to start a dialogue, but instead as a tribute, and as a way for me to process my emotions. I began my letter with an excerpt from a Marge Piercy poem called "To Have Without Holding." It goes like this. It hurts to love wide open, stretching the muscles that feel as if they are made of wet plaster, then of blunt knives, then of sharp knives. Dear Grandma, I believe that this is the first letter I have ever written to you, both the first and the last. It seems that I always start my letters with poems. Somehow they help me to find my own words. I've been thinking about you often lately, It makes my throat sore and my chest ache. I feel so strange contemplating your death, for I would not have existed without you, yet I feel like my existence barely touched yours. I would not exist without you, yet I do not think you knew me at all. My dad told me your body hung on more than you wanted it to. He told me that you felt ready to be done with being alive in such a frail body, one that was too weak and damaged to allow you to do the things that you wanted to do. He told me that you missed splitting wood and pruning your roses. I am so sorry that you could not do those things that you wanted to do, that you had not been able to split wood and prune your roses for a very long time. We visited your house across the river yesterday. The garden looked lovely, with the rosemary in full bloom and the magnolia tree just beginning to drop its dewy pale pink flowers. We picnicked on the grass, and the blossoms on the apple trees drifted down on soft wings when the wind blew. I found English lavender scented incense in the bathroom cupboard. It smelled like you, or like I remember that house smelling when you lived there, like cigarettes and flowers. I took a bath in the evening as the sun sank down below the ridgeline, staining it pale blue with the final dregs of light. I used the old lavender Epsom bath salts that sat underneath the windowsill, the ones with only a small seashell to scoop them up. They smelled like dust and soap. I gently caught the tiny brown spider who lived in the jar and placed it on the rim of the tub, where it simply sat, patiently waiting to return home. I first had believed it to be stuck, trapped in the jar, but it had not moved, so I put it back in when I finished with my bath. Those salts belonged more to the small spider than to me. I wonder, did you use those same bath salts? Did you lie in that tub watching the light fade outside? Did you light the kerosene lamp that sits on the shelf above the sink? Could I have lit the same lamp you used? Did you lie back in the water, grateful for a moment's peace, while my dad and my aunts fed the pig, Sloppy, down at the barn? Did you check the drain for frogs? The way I used to when we visited you for dinner? The way I did last night before I turned on the water? I know what I am truly asking you, but it feels simpler to pose my questions with yes or no answers. Did we share a moment, an experience? I wanted to take a bath, to stare out the small paned window and imagine you bathing here 45 years ago. I wanted to make a fire in the stove to heat the water for my bath. I wanted to, and imagined you completing the same chore, urging my dad and his sisters not to touch the hot stovetop. I wanted to lay back in the water and rest my head in the same place that yours had rested. Did I? I'll think of you while I wonder. All my love, Melia. If we were in the Midland Chapel in person today, sweating in the early September sun, I would play this song to you while you all walked out. This is for my grandma.